I recently put my daughter in daycare. I didn't want to do it, but being that I'm a single parent, I don't have much of a choice. After dubious research, I found a daycare center that seemed like a good fit. It was run by a girl named Wendy, and she seemed fairly popular in the neighborhood, as there were a number of kids there when I went to investigate. One of the things I particularly liked about it was the fact that they had security cameras set up around the center so that parents could access them and check on their kids. It quickly became an obsession of mine. All the kids wore jackets that the daycare provided because the air conditioner had been on the fritz, so it was quite cold there. But it was easy to tell which little girl was mine. I loved being able to watch my daughter play with the other kids as I worked, and it gave me peace of mind knowing that she was doing alright. I couldn't keep my eyes glued to the screen the entire time, but in passing I saw that she made a friend she played with almost every single day, and she even had a favorite toy. It was a little medicine ball that she and her friend would toss back and forth. They played with it every day. After about a week, things seemed to be going quite well. My little girl had started recently grasping potty training and was more well-behaved than I'd ever known her to be. Needless to say, I was very impressed with the daycare. That was when she started singing the song. She hummed it at first, and when I asked her what it was, she told me it was a song they taught her at daycare. Eventually, she learned all the words and began to sing. "We eat their teeth and eat their bones, and slit their throats inside their homes. We sing this song, and when we're done, we'll go to hell and have more fun." She sang it all the time, no matter how many times I had asked her to stop. It made my skin crawl. Why would they teach a song like this to children? The next day, with the song stuck in my head, I resolved to call Wendy. I wanted to tell her that I disapproved of the song, and I didn't want her or anything else like that being taught to my daughter. If it continued, I would be forced to find a new daycare. As I watched the children play on the computer screen, my little girl played with the ball like she always did. I picked up my phone and called the daycare. When Wendy answered, I told her about my concern. She was incredibly polite about it and said that one of the other children had been going around singing it, and she said she thought it was from a movie or something. But she was working on putting a stop to it because that song was definitely not for children. She said it disturbed her as much as it did me. I'd been pacing around my office as I spoke to her, and just as we were saying goodbye, I looked back down at the screen and noticed something odd. The Wendy on the screen was not on her phone, but instead she was helping a child with his juice box. She said goodbye and hung up the phone, and I watched the cameras, not reciprocating her farewell, but transfixed on the screen in front of me. I stared at my daughter and her playing with the ball, and I tried to think of how many times I'd seen her drop it as they tossed it back and forth. I didn't think I'd seen that happen very much. And the kid in the corner was always in the corner, working on that same puzzle. How long had he been working on that puzzle? That's when I began to suspect that instead of watching a live feed, I'd been watching a recording. This story takes place about 2 years ago. Luckily the guy's been caught, but I still have an uneasy feeling every time I enter my own home. So as I said, about 2 years ago my friend, let's call him Tommy, came over. I was around 10 years old while Tommy was 11. The two of us were inseparable, partners in crime, the two musketeers. So when I had seen on the television that morning that an armed and dangerous man had somehow escaped the courthouse jail, we immediately went into action, setting up defenses and readying our armory. And by that I mean we stacked all the Nerf guns I owned on my bunk bed and readied ourselves in case some man burst into our home unexpectedly. We sat there for hours, unmoving. If we were in the military, we would have been given medals of honor. Around 5:20ish, my mother returned home from work. We thought our job defending was over. How very wrong we were, though. My mother told us that because her and her father were going out to dinner, that Tommy would be spending the night. For then, it seemed like a sleepover, but for us, it seemed like we were going back to war. Shortly after they left, we had a meeting and we decided that we were going to need reinforcements. And by that, we meant my neighbor. We'll call him Roger. Now, I wasn't as close to Roger as I was to Tommy, but he would usually be willing to join us on our crazy ventures if the time called for it. This was not one of those times. Tommy and I had arrived at Roger's house, and I rang the doorbell our usual 7 times, just to make sure they got the message. Roger's mother arrived at the door and gave us the worst possible news. Roger was grounded for a week. Tommy and I were devastated, but we knew it only meant that we'd shoulder the responsibility ourselves. On our way back to the house, I decided I'd look up on my phone how to make a Molotov cocktail, seeing as they were my favorite video games at the time and it seemed like a good idea. I felt around in my pockets and I noticed my phone was missing. No big deal, I probably left it at the house. Tommy and I returned to my house and walked upstairs to my room. I told him to send a text to my phone and we'd see where the ding would come from. That's when things became odd. Tommy sent the text and while we didn't hear a ding, it wasn't long after before the message said, "Read, 8:02 p.m. Tommy was just as confused as I was, seeing as we were both sure that I had left it there. Tommy asked if maybe I left it at Roger's, and I told him I hadn't brought it out then. It couldn't have fallen out of my pocket either. We'd been walking on the sidewalk and I would have heard the sound of it dropping. Tommy sent another text, thinking that maybe the first one had glitched somehow. There was no response other than the quick little, "Read, 8:14 p.m. At this point, I began wondering if Tommy had taken my phone as a joke. It wasn't his style, but I still wouldn't put it past him. I asked if he had taken it, and Tommy denied it, swearing up and down he'd never take something like that as a joke. While I was inclined to believe him, seeing as he was my best friend, it was still the only explanation that made sense. It was then that Tommy accused me of pranking him, making it seem like I had hidden my own phone just to mess with him. I shut Tommy's idea down pretty quick by telling him I would have hidden his phone if I was going to mess with him. Tommy began sending message after message. Read, 8:14 p.m. Read, 8:29 p.m. Read, 8:36 p.m. Tommy sent one more message and this time we heard the ding. Coming from my closet. Read, 8:42 p.m. Tommy and I ran out of there as fast as we could, knowing that someone was in there who shouldn't have been. We called 911 and explained everything as they sent an officer over. When the man got there, he went inside and not only found the back door open, but my closet door as well. On the floor was a knife from our kitchen and my phone. We were lucky we weren't killed, and after that night, my parents installed a better security system as well as cameras. Tommy wouldn't come over for a month after that. Now things are relatively back to normal, but to this day I wonder what would have happened if we wouldn't have gone to Roger's house when the guy broke in. What would have happened if we would have fallen asleep instead or hadn't realized that my phone was missing. My grandfather told me a story once as we sat around the campfire in his backyard in the cool night of the Arizona desert. The horizon was clear and each star twinkled in the purple sky, with a full fat moon hanging low over the mountains. His voice was raspy and gravelly, the result of a lifetime of smoking cigars and drinking whiskey. The fire danced and shined across his wide dark eyes as he settled into his seat, ready to tell his story. "Way back when I was a boy, about your age," he began, "I lived outside of the Apache reservation with your great-grandfather. He had returned from war and set about raising horses and cattle on a 100-acre ranch settled between a brambly mountainside, with dirt good for growing thorn bush and not much else. One night my mother was sick, and Pa and I took a trip into town, about 50 miles away, straight through a dry desert, over a washed-out creek and somewhat abandoned farmstead. The fire sparkled and a log cracked, jolted me out of the story. What's next? I asked. "Settle down, boy. You'll hear soon enough." Pa and I were driving an old Ford pickup truck. I remember it was dark out, inky and thick, with only the lights of our old truck lighting up the road. I remember, too, when the engine began to sputter and the truck slowed to a jerky stop. "Dang it," Pa said, guiding the Ford to the side of the road as it coasted to a halt. "Stay here, son," as he stepped out into the darkness, shutting the door with a heavy thud. My window was down and a cool desert air was breezy and felt good on my hot face and neck. Pa was getting water from the back to cool the engine, and that's when I smelled it. Rotten eggs. Strange, I thought, to smell sulfur in the desert. My nose also picked up carrion, like one of them dead bloated cattle that would drop from the heat and lay there until the crows pecked enough holes in their hide to cause the whole thing to explode. It stunk, and I gagged. My skin started to tingle too. The back of my neck felt itchy and my face started to get hot. The wind stopped blowing and I hung still and heavy with the stink filling the cab. "Pa?" I said. "Pa? Pa?" There was no answer. My heart started beating and I felt such a fear in me, in my bones, in my chest. Boy, I tell you, I never felt fear like this. Not until Vietnam. Not until I saw men dying around me. I locked the door and reached over to my pa's door and saw a shadow bound across the road through both dim beams of light, across the partly open domed hood. Grandfather paused. He spit a fat wad of tobacco spit off to his side as he looked pensively into the darkness. I realized I was holding my breath and I gasped for air. The night was cool, but I was sweaty and clammy. "Well, what happened? What about your father? What did you see?" He sighed. "A creature." He shook his head. "You have to understand, boy. There are legends, old legends, older than the rocks out in the valley. Older still than Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, than the old chiefs and their shamans. The Apache, the Hopi, the Cherokee, and all them old tribes and First Peoples, they told tales, old stories, about dark magic. A deal made with old spirits of blood sacrifice to gain power. Old power, enough to fight each other and the Spaniards, and later the white men that came for their land and women. They called them..." He paused. Grandfather took a deep breath and bodied forward into his tale. Across the fire and the sky and the desert, the creek, the moon, the sun, and old mountains. He bodied forward. They called them skinwalkers, shape changers, old warriors resurrected as skinless men, all sinew and muscle, walking on deer legs with the torso of a man and the head of a coyote. But messed up, boy. Long and malformed snouts, teeth like a bowie knife, long arms and standing 7 foot, even hunched over. They'd gut the old cowboys and white riders. They'd run through bullets and sabers, part the Spanish armor like it was a potato sack. Wily, too. They could change their voice to match a person you knew, or might know. Boy, that's what I saw. Big and fast. Only for a second, it ran across the road. Gray and mottled, muscles flexing under its legs, hooves clomping on the road, stringy, muscled, hunched shoulders. And it turned, looked right into the cab, looked right into my eyes, and I swear, boy, I swear it grinned at me. I sank into my seat in shock and fear, shaking. I knew death was near. The air was electric. I smelled ozone and brimstone. The air felt like right before the lightning comes and blows a tree to smithereens, charged and full with power. I yelled for my paw, but no words came out, just a dry squeak. I was shaking as my grandfather told this story. He was still there, so I knew he lived, but the supernatural always fascinated me, and even now, I felt the force of his words. The real power of skinwalkers was trickery. Sure, they could change their voices, but Also their skin. That's why the gods took their hide, so they could take others. Not for long, the legends say. Maybe an hour before the soul of the skin they wore would come looking for their mortal shell before going to whatever hell awaited them. Though I think that getting skinned alive was hell enough. A minute passed in what felt like a lifetime, 1 second in 1,000 years. My father's door opened and I jerked my head to the left, putting my fists up to fend off an attack. "Son, it's me," my father said, before climbing into the cab. He grabbed the steering wheel and pulled himself in awkwardly, jerking himself into the seat. I cringed into the corner. I looked at him. I looked hard, boy. "Your great-grandfather was a good man, treated me and my ma right. He fought the Nazis and saw the worst of men in Poland when he freed all of them camps. And now I was taking his measure. Is this my father? Do I make a run or do I die? Is it him or not? Let's go get that medicine for your ma," as he pulled the truck into gear and pulled it onto the road, and our trip resumed. I guess it was him after all. "But how did you know? Was it because he said something about your mom?" "No, boy, I knew. Because out the window, out the corner of my eye, I seen that beast running 50 miles an hour right next to the car, looking at me with them yellow eyes and a grinning mouth. I looked and saw it, hunched and angry, running next to us, boy. My pa kept his eyes on the road, locked straight forward. 'Son,' he said, 'don't look at it. Do not look at it.' That's how I knew, boy." "911, what's the address of your emergency?"
I'm in the walls.
"Sir, I need the address of your emergency."
She doesn't know I'm in the house.
"I need you to tell me the nature of your emergency. Are you or anyone else in danger?"
Sue,
"Are you able to tell me the nature of your emergency?"
I've been here for so long. I've been waiting. I will continue to wait.
"Sir, you need to know that playing a joke on 911 is a crime. If this isn't a joke, you need to let me know immediately."
No joke. I'm hiding.
"If you cannot tell me the location of your emergency, I will need to terminate this call."
I'm at 350 Hill Street in Falmouth.
"Sir,
Yes.
that's my address.
Yes.
I'm using 911 to play a joke?"
You can confirm my location. In fact, I'm sure you have by now.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Why are you doing this?
When the wind is done blowing, it never comes back. Destruction is its mausoleum.
That doesn't make any sense. Why are you in my house? Is something wrong there?
Yes,
What's wrong?
I am.
I don't understand.
I watch you.
What?
I live in your house and I watch you. I'm in the walls.
No.
Yes. Speak up, Alice.
How do you know my name?
I know more than you understand, Alice. Keep control of yourself, Alice.
The police are on their way.
I know.
You're committing a crime.
I know.
You'll be going to jail.
I doubt it.
Why?
You must realize, Alice, that I possess quite a bit of stealth. I'll be long gone by the time Unit 45 arrives from its location 1.2 miles away.
How?
They'll see where I've been, of course. They'll even figure out where I've been getting into and out of the walls.
And stay away. Just stay away from me.
I will.
Good.
For a bit.
Never come back.
I will return when you get complacent again. You'll be alert, paranoid even, for some time. You'll be an emotional wreck and jump at shadows, and justifiably so. Your family and friends will walk you through it, but slowly you'll start to heal. Those aforementioned family and friends will support this healing. They'll encourage you to put this all behind you, to move on. Once you've healed, after you've moved on, then I will return.
What?
It's better this way. Healing will be your pain.
I'll move.
And I'll follow you there.
I...
Surely you must comprehend that if I know so much about you now, you'll never be able to move without me becoming aware. You'll never be free of me. The wonderful thing is that even when I'm physically away from you, I'll always be on your mind. I'll never leave. Good night, Alice.
It stared through my window. It didn't matter what window. It didn't matter what floor. At night, that horrifying smiling face stared back at me. It waited for something. I didn't know what. I was afraid to find out. I first tried calling the police, thinking it was some stalker. The police came and they saw nothing. They left, telling me if I saw anything to call them. How was I supposed to tell them that it was still standing in the window, watching me, smiling, showing its disgusting crooked teeth? I hadn't left my home in weeks. I got the call that I was fired from my job 3 days ago, and when I tried to explain what was going on, when I tried to see my boss, it wouldn't let me leave. I couldn't see it, but it was still there, even during the daytime. I was trapped by a monster that wanted something from me. It wasn't until last night that I finally found out what it was waiting for. It stared at me, changing rooms with me. Its wicked grin and crazed smile followed me every moment. For the first time since it started watching me, it opened its awful teeth and spoke. "Let me in." My stomach dropped. I didn't want to look at it, but I was so shocked I couldn't help it. "What?" I whispered in surprise to myself. I narrowed my eyes and the faint details in my face started to become a little more clear. Its eyes started to burn like fire. "Let me in, David," it said again, chuckling like there was a joke I wasn't in on. I backed away from the window, watching it watch me. "No! No!" I yelled at it. I ran, but no matter where I went, its face taunted me with the awful laughter. I tried hiding, running into my bedroom. Its face took up the entire entity of my sliding glass door. When it spoke, its voice shook my bones. "David, let me in. Let me in, David." I had never felt such a primal fear, such an urge to hide out of pure survival instinct. I ran into my closet, slamming the door shut. I pulled down my clothes from the hangers, hiding myself in them like I would do as a child. The yelling stopped for a moment. There was no window to watch me through. Was it gone? After another moment of silence, I let out a small sigh in relief. I reached through the pile of clothes and for my doorknob, and just as quickly as it all stopped, it started again. My door started rattling uncontrollably, and I yanked my hand away. It screamed for me. "David, let me in! Let me in!" I covered my ears, hoping to drown out the screaming, but it never ended. The sound of the screeching bled through my fingers. It went on for hours, but I kept looking at my phone, hoping for morning to come. 11:30 p.m. Not a single minute had passed since I locked myself in this closet.
Time is no longer your friend. Let me in.
I've been here for almost a day now. I've been counting the seconds, the minutes, the hours to try and distract myself. But it's still there, screaming for me to let it in. 11:30 p.m. Time still hasn't passed. I'm going to kill myself if this continues. I can break off a hanger and just jab it into me. It would be so much faster than waiting. I had it ready, gripping it tight in my hands. I can't handle this much longer. I'm going insane. It stared through my window, but it screams for me through the door. We were on an island off the coast of Maine on a family retreat I'd been assisting with. A camp for both parents as well as their kids, if you will. I'd volunteered after seeing an ad in the classifieds. It sounded like, and it was, a beautiful getaway for families to bond and breathe the freshest of air. There were a few dozen families staying there to try a nature-filled and communal trip to enrich their children's lives. A sort of escape from the turmoil of the city and the suburbs. It was beautiful, with walks through the forest and wood stoves, oil lamps, and a lack of cell phones making it a truly magical place, outside of the fangs and pitfalls of traditional society. The family retreat was on one of the most beautiful islands I'd been to. By far the most lovely place I'd worked in my 40 years on this planet. I was in charge of coordination, scheduling events, exploring the wilderness on long hikes, and just watching over everybody. I rounded the families up for meals and would try to get the kids excited about something aside from a cell phone screen. All was going well until we received a severe storm warning and we knew it would be far too dangerous to try and stay. And we had no choice but to evacuate the island and head inland to Maine. We gathered into a tiny ferry, singing folk songs and eating chips as we rode the choppy waters back to safety on the rockland of Maine. You ever leave the house without your wallet or your keys and you feel naked or exposed? It's a subtle feeling, but it's unmistakable. The dark recesses of your mind yell and wave arms to signal that you are forgetting something you need, and it's almost like a sixth sense, a nagging of your psyche to become whole again. This is what I felt in the following months, with no understanding why. I confirmed with all the families, and every child was accounted for by their parents. Years passed, but this tugging at my well-being would not subside, and I eventually decided to go back to the island to finally put this feeling at rest. It had been 2 years, and I figured I could use a vacation somewhere beautiful anyways. The flight, cab, and ferry were swift, and I'd arrived with no trouble. Memories were flooding back like a familiar book. It felt a bit unsettling to be on the remote island all by myself, though. When the ferry shipped off and I watched it drift out of view, I felt an unease I'll never forget. My one tether to civilization drifting off into the dense fog and ocean spray. I hiked up to the vacant lodges, entering the one I'd stayed in 2 years earlier. I unpacked and cooked up some of the canned soup I brought on the wood stove and tried to breathe deeply and relax, watching my cell phone battery dwindle to 25% as the sky darkened into the evening. I loaded the wood stove with more firewood and lit the oil lamp, pacified by the ever-present rustic calm that inhabited this magical island. When I jolted awake, the pale light of the night sky let me know that it was likely around 3 a.m. But I chose not to check my phone as there was no way to charge it and I need to save battery. I heard it this time. Fully awake in the cabin on the empty island, the peculiar moan and a high pitch that was unmistakably that of a small child. My eyes widened and I quickly dressed and grabbed my flashlight, unable to yet truly perceive what I was dreading. I'd left somebody behind. The night chill seeped between my socks and boots as I hiked in the direction of the freakish moan. The dead of night was shadowed in a cold blue. No light pollution aside from the freckles of stars above in the black sky. I stepped over layers of pine needles and twigs, headed towards the cabin I recognized as the source of the sound. I opened the heavy wooden door and saw his back. A half-naked child was facing the window. I called out, "Hello?" And he slowly spun around. He looked sick, visibly shaken, but shockingly he was alive. I recognized him after a minute. He had been one of the children on that group trip nearly 2 years ago. "Are you all right?" I asked, overwhelmed that this boy was alive, and he nodded. "Where are your parents?" I asked, then realizing they would have never left him behind intentionally or not returned either. He shook his head and faced the window once more. He was maybe 5 or 6, larger than I remembered, but the face was clear. He was the son of a sweet but distant couple that kept to themselves. It wasn't until I saw him that I realized they hadn't been on the return trip of the ferry either. I was amazed this child was alive. He'd been on a pretty much barren island for around 2 years. It was nothing short of a miracle. I asked him if he was hungry, and he shook his head no. "I found a food button," he said plainly, as if it was a common household accessory. "I press it and food comes." I shook my head in disbelief and said, "Excuse me?" He just gazed out the window and said, "When I'm hungry, I press the button and food comes," in his soft, high voice. I was confused at why nobody would just take him off the island. A bit shocked that someone was bringing him food whenever he was hungry. The commute to the island took over an hour. This just didn't make any sense. "Can I see this food button?" I asked, unable to grasp what he exactly meant. The boy just nodded and walked out of the cabin. I followed him into the dark evening air, observing his tics and shivers as he led me up the path to the one place on the island with power. The station was used for emergencies. I used it to organize the evacuation on the island a few years ago. I followed the boy as he entered the lodge and walked over to the radio station, pointing at it with a shaky arm. It was then that I smelled the decay. I knew something was wrong. I just had no idea how wrong until I saw the jagged shapes in the shadows of the adjacent room. They were barely visible, but there was no doubt in my mind that they were human remains, stripped of nearly every inch of meat except for a few strands of cartilage and chewed muscle. Dread poured over me, and I slowly stepped backwards to the door as he said, "I didn't use it this time, and food came anyways." And he began to walk towards me with hungry eyes. I never hit a kid before, but I hope you can forgive my trespass in this scenario as the kid charged towards me, ravenous and wild-eyed. He bit deep into my thigh before I was able to react. He went down with 2 punches, and I was able to tie him up with some bungees I'd brought on the trip back in the past. I waited on that lonely dock until sunrise, when the ferry eventually came. There were dozens of wrecked ships in various states of abandon floating around and crashed ashore on that island. His parents were identified among the dozens of remains in that lodge, as well as those of multiple attempted rescuers who'd responded to his plea of the food button on that VHF radio in that grisly tomb of a lodge.